Welcome to the Conscious Living Podcast, conversations to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. An uplifting and inspiring series of conversations and talks with your host, Jackie Woodside. We are educating minds, empowering lives, and enlightening souls to create a world where love prevails. In this engaging podcast, we deliver exciting, positive, transformative talks and teachings designed to elevate your life. Now, let's join our host, Jackie Woodside, for this week's session.
Hello there, Jackie Woodside here, the founder and the host of the Conscious Living Podcast, where we are here to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. Thank you so much for being with us today and for being committed to this walk of living life more consciously. You know, we're living in a time that we are so inundated with so many things coming at us, so the rapid changes of our world today, changes in climate, changes in economy, changes in technology. Is AI going to take over human cognizance and intelligence? There's so much that we're dealing with. And for you to be one of the people who says, hey, I'm going to press pause. I'm going to spend a little bit of time with Jackie and her guests to think about my life at a deeper level, to raise my awareness and to ask bigger questions about who I am, how I'm living, and how can I use my life to be a contribution to make this world a better place for everyone. So thank you for being with us here on the Conscious Living Podcast. I want to introduce you today to my guest, Jim Boswell. What an eclectic and interesting background Jim has, from serving in the military, where he lived on submarines, to being a technology executive and learned a ton about not only business and technology, but also about human performance. And now Jim is also an author who has just published his first book called Lifelong Fulfillment: Take Charge of Your Life. And we're going to dive into some of those tenets today and Jim's path and process. So Jim, thank you for being with us. Do you mind saying a little bit more about yourself and your journey so our listeners can get to know you a bit?
Well, thank you, Jackie, for having me on board.
Of course.
Yes, I'd be glad to amplify on that. Yes, I'm a baby boomer like many. And I started out, with the frustration and understanding that I needed lots of education. I was a late bloomer in terms of understanding what my career might be. And to do that, I kept looking for opportunities for schooling and training and so forth. And interestingly enough, the U.S. Navy submarines offered a lot of that for a young person. And I wouldn't want to make a career, but it's one of the better 6 years of my life in terms of getting me on the road.
Nice.
And it taught me some things about personal development that I've carried forward. Yes, I am now an author. I am now a podcast host, and I'm presenting a way for practical users such as myself to engage everything about personal development, which allows you to either, secure the happiness you're looking for, the fulfillment, or maybe a rich life that leads to great wisdom. So that's what I'm doing these days, and trying to deliver that back to the public, quite frankly, as a give back for all that I benefited from and all the people that helped me. We also operate strictly as a nonprofit. So,
Nice.
We live, eat, and breathe the whole process.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic that you operate as a nonprofit and give it all back. That's amazing.
Yes, ma'am. I'm not looking to, fund much of anything other than the outreach that we try and do and the podcasts and so forth like that. But, no, none of it goes back in my pocket.
Well,
Anyway.
let's dive in a little bit. So you've written this book called Lifetime Fulfillment: Take Charge of Your Life. And you said that, as we were talking earlier, that you are trained in something called point solutions, and various concepts that help people lead a better life. So let's dive in a little bit about point solutions. What did you learn? I think you learned that in business, was that, and then you translated it to personal life?
Yes, I did. So for instance, let's say, my job requires me to understand statistics. Okay. Maybe I'm a plant manager or I'm a QA person in the technology space. To do that, Statistics is not an end-all be-all. It delivers a service. It's a tool. So we characterize that as a point solution. If you want to take that into the personal development space, let's say you have an angst about where you're headed, and you decide that, the county offers licensed counseling available to you. And maybe that's the only thing you're wanting to try is to get unstuck, to understand why you're stuck, and then to get unstuck and get started on something. Well, let's assume it's just one thing that's bothering you. Maybe it's your financial situation. You're struggling, you're stuck, and everything. A point solution is, how do I fix my economics? Economics is not everything. In other words, a well-rounded person has expertise in, some basic math, some basic economics, particularly on the personal side. They would probably want to understand, what their personality profile might be. If they're the really curious type, they might want to know an emotional IQ or a regular intelligence IQ. There's a lot of things like that. A lot of people don't know what their risk tolerance is until you talk to them and work them through that process. A lot of people don't know that, a well-rounded life gets you further than being totally specialized. Because then you just have to hire other people to do the rest of your life for you in that sense. So what we try and do is take these point solutions, and lifelong fulfillment is a foundation into which each of these point solutions fit. So if I want behavioral psychology in there, that's a point solution. If I want it to relate to me specifically and also the economic situation I'm living in, which is another point solution, well, I use the lifelong fulfillment development process. And it's cradle to grave in terms of establishing plans, providing feedback, implementing continuous improvement. It looks at 20-year-olds, say, as a class of people where this might be originally applicable. It looks at people in mid-career, say in the mid-40s, and it looks at people in the 60, 65 range that are anticipating going into retirement. Because to be frank, at least in my experience and others that I've known, our goals change. And our goals change can be quite drastic and quite speedy. In fact, we might be drinking from the fire hose, so to speak, in terms of managing that. Well, this helps you do that and helps you see what's appropriate at various stages of life and to get away from the fear of engaging your own self, establishing your own value proposition, and working toward what you really want in your life.
Jim, I love what you're saying. You definitely are taking a very tactical, strategic approach to life fulfillment and growth, personal growth and development. I'm curious, as we dive into your work, you use the topic lifelong fulfillment. How are you using that word fulfillment, and what does it mean inside of your body of work to live a fulfilled life? What does it mean?
What we do in there, we do go to basic basic psychology for this. So I would say if anybody knows what the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, in about the middle of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you see that happiness really starts to occur. You see toward the top of the pyramid that that's where fulfillment occurs. And there are certain psychological researchers that claim that at the very tip of Maslow's hierarchy is an area where people want what's called a rich life, which the reason they pursue that is they want alternative viewpoints to be a part of their thinking. And the end product there is wisdom. So if you look at meaningful and fulfillment, we use them interchangeably for that top part of Maslow's hierarchy. So that's our goal, and that's what we speak to. When it comes to wisdom, there's other people who have more to offer as a point solution on taking fulfillment and then driving it into wisdom. And if you simply want to be happy, this set lets you know what do I need to do to get to that point of personal satisfaction.
Okay, so It is very strategic in how you approach this, and it sounds like you approach kind of every area of life around, finance and career and relationships. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, if, for instance, you don't understand the U.S. economy at the basic level, based on information from the U.S. Bureau of Labor, the census that we take every decade, then you have access to this directly in the book. And what it does is we use graphs and charts. There's about 40 of them in there, and tables that describe certain things you need to be aware of, because your environment, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. In other words, we don't live in a vacuum. We live in an environment. And there's certain environmental influences, like what does it take economics wise to realize my goals? In other words, do I want to be an electrician or do I want to be a heart surgeon? And those are totally different things. And you can't really plan those on the fly. Yes, you can have a desire for it, but it really helps if you have some economic knowledge, you have point solutions outside my book that you can also draw on. And our book also includes a huge bibliography, both in terms of podcasts and experts in all these various areas. So if you need a little bit of math, we got that. If you need to understand statistics, we deal in a lot of that. We talk about economics, both personal and national. We talk about the skewed normal curve of the US economy relative to personal incomes. We talk about, out of the box thinking, like, well, what is the real cost of having a child all the way to maturity? And how many do I want? And should I even think about affording that?
Mm-hmm.
So it helps you. Our book is to help you have processes that forces you to recognize who you are and what you want, to get rid of the fear of, engaging yourself and being stuck.
Mm-hmm.
You can't make decisions, can't move forward. You need to get past that. And we try and help people do that.
Yeah, so Jim, that's actually where I wanted to jump in a little bit.
Sure.
My podcast is about conscious living. And you say that your process teaches people how to understand who you are and what you want out of life. Can
Right.
you say a little bit more about that? Because that really goes to the heart of what a lot of my listeners are interested in.
Right. Well, the book is fairly agnostic about how you get to a point. So what we rely on is an appeal to people to, let's say, in your first pass through this process, that you need to be willing to suspend your prior training and suspend any non-factual based attitudes or decisions that you may have made, so that you can take personality profile tests that represent truly your decisions and your thoughts and your needs and your wants, as opposed to, society influences, schooling, teachers, parents, and so forth. And we do this by saying you need to take some tests. You need to take a Myers-Briggs. You need to take a DISC test. You need to take positive psychology via test. You need to be challenged with, on the Maslow's hierarchy, which do you want? Right now, if your thinking's happiness, fine. You can always change it later. But it's nice to know if it's happiness, fulfillment, or you want to be the wisest guy on the block, as you pass out of this life.
Okay. So you answer a lot of those questions, again, kind of from a very analytical perspective of using inventories like the Myers-Briggs or the DISC to help people learn about their personality profile.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what are some of the experiences you have with people? Because that's fairly tactical in nature. It may give people some data. Do you feel that, so how does that impact people once they have that data?
Well, once they have it, we talk about a process by which they take these different data points, and they also decide at what risk level they function. A lot of people are risk averse. Many are kind of in the medium middle, and a few have very high risk tolerance.
Okay, wait, how do you help people know what their risk tolerance is? I think that's an interesting question.
I actually walk them through that whole discussion in the book and in my newsletter, that addresses this particular development section. And it actually challenges them to make their best guess at that point. I don't send them out to learn about risk analysis as a point solution, although they could do that, certainly.
Yep.
Okay, so with that together, what we then do is take that and say, okay, now we're going to do non-judgmental brainstorming. Okay, now you know something about your life that's not based on your system one, Kahneman system one brain. You're thinking more logically. And so let's sit down and brainstorm. And by brainstorming, say about 20 things they may really want. And then we use Pareto to reduce that to a manageable number to say, okay, this is what I want. This is what I need to get there. And these are my constraints that I now have to deal with as well. So you start beginning the formation of some kind of a plan. And, I've actually been through this personally multiple times, and I've used it since my mid-20s. And it allows you to reiterate the plan if things change, and things always do change. So
Sure.
that's not considered a surprise. That's part of the process.
Mm-hmm. So having a plan is part of your instruction about lifelong fulfillment, is that people should have a sense of where they want to go and who they are, and then point solutions to help deal with the challenges that come and get in the way.
Exactly. And so what the Lifelong Fulfillment website does is say you're a 20-something. There's an entire custom reading list for the 20-somethings as they go through this process. If you're, 45, there's an entire reading list, not only the ones that you should have read when you were 20, but also ones for your particular challenges, because your world is different than when you were 20.
That's so cool. Try to get a 20-year-old to read, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
I have a 19-year-old son, so
And then,
I'm very much in that domain right now.
Yeah, and then we do it for the retirees, and in fact, we've taught classes and done instructional presentations about how to get unstuck as a retiree, because
As a
nobody
retiree,
knows how to
yeah.
retire, right?
It's such an important phase of life, that you really do have to redesign yourself at that phase of life. So I'm curious how your process is different from, kind of all the other self-help books or personal development programs or approaches out there. I'm already hearing some differences, but I'd like to hear that from you.
Well, one of the things we try and do and hold ourselves to is we don't want to deliver motivation and inspiration that then subsequently gets frustrated because I don't know how to do it. In other words, the book, The Point Solution, tells me all about a particular problem. It lists me things to do. And about at that point, a lot of them back away from saying, okay, set that out, try it for 90 days, measure it, feedback to the system. In other words, they don't help you do it. And the problem is, in my view, between siloing and not helping people do it and getting them frustrated when, hey, you motivated me, but now I got this thing and I don't know what to do with it. Or you've inspired me. I'd like to be like you. Well, it's going to take a little more than that. So what we try and do is solve the motivation inspiration problem without follow through by this entire lifelong fulfillment process. Because once we figure out who you are, what you want, we teach you how to do to understand what you don't know, because that's a very large part of it. We all assume we know more, but we don't always know what other people think about us until we ask them. If we don't get into the habit of continuous education, we are basically, putting handcuffs on ourselves. So you have to get into those routines. They're all part of the process.
Yeah.
We teach people how to make good decisions and how to identify good authorities to go to. So for instance, let's say I've got, 8 things to deal with. If I'm a perfectionist, I got to do all 8, and I got to do them at least at a satisfactory, if not perfect level. If I'm a Pareto person and I believe in the 80-20 rule, that I
Mhm.
really only have one or two of those that really matter. In other words, where I put most of my effort and I get 80% of the results back, whether it's psychic income, money, happiness, or fulfillment.
Okay.
And we teach people how to start making good decisions. We teach them by the bibliography and showing them how to do research online, how to figure out, a certain problem by the various experts that are available for that. And we teach them not to rely on any one, but to look for a little bit of intersection between the solutions they're providing, and that is probably something you can hang your hat on and move forward with.
Okay. So you're different in that you don't just provide motivation and inspiration, you provide tactical, strategic ways to actually move from point A to point B to point C according to what people want in their lives. I'm curious, Jim, you haven't mentioned anything about like kind of the spiritual or etheric areas of life or the areas of kind of depth of meaning and feeling a life purpose. Do you address that, or is the stuff you do more kind of in the psychological realm?
Uh, for us to be as applicable to everybody in the audience, we chose a path which does not make any choices about what your inspiration is.
Okay.
Whether, in other words, if you come from a religious background, this works just as well as if you are not religious. If
Okay.
you come from a background where, you have certain attitudes about things that you want to hang on to because you think they're valuable, we're not going to deny you that. The process is not there to tell you what's right or wrong. It's there to help you do what you want to do. And it allows you to go out and bring these other parts into it, the inspirational, the religious, the whatever motivates you. I know you talk about energy and, that's certainly part of the equation. But it's not our judgment that matters. It's what the individual wants. We want to leave that untainted by anything we have to say.
Yeah, except what if someone has beliefs or attitudes that are contrary to their stated desires, and they're going to need some way of looking at that and making some changes, don't you think?
Yes, well, within the process, you wind up confronting
Uh-huh.
things like goals that don't make sense or goals that are at the bottom of the hierarchy,
Well,
and
I'm not talking about goals. I'm more talking about the inner processes of, self-talk and beliefs and lack of confidence, anxiety. You talked about being risk averse. If somebody wants to build an 8-figure business, but they're risk averse, there's going to be a conflict there.
exactly. Well,
Yeah.
that's where we send them out to the point solutions. In other words, they don't solve it inside the process. They will go to, an expert.
Yeah, some external source.
Exactly, because you couldn't
Okay.
do that otherwise. This would be a whole library of books.
Right. So what you're saying is you're presenting a framework that says identify the desires, identify the needs, and then using this very tactical approach to get things kind of put in place, bring some structural integrity to the plan so that you're addressing it, but going out to other experts to deal with those areas. Am I getting it?
Yes, ma'am, you are. You are.
That's
In fact,
that's that's really comprehensive.
there's workbook sheets in there that actually walk you through every bit of the process that force you into a decision mode on, for me right now, is this right? Or do I have the constraints that I can, keep this as a real goal? Or do I downsize it? Do I change my strategy? And oh, by the way, I need some coaching maybe on
Uh-huh.
finance. Okay,
Yep.
well, there's plenty of coaches out there. There's authorities for coaching in the bibliography that we offer. So you have a point solution you can go look to right away. And it's already essentially pre-qualified. Not
That's
that it's
really great.
comprehensive, but it's something
That's
as
great.
opposed to starting from nowhere.
That's great. So you're very committed to, helping people move and engage in personal development. What would you say is your priority message that you want to bring to people about their ability to have agency over their own life?
Well, it's similar to, I think, the discussion I heard on your podcast, which had to do with, okay, are you going to lead a life that you've designed, or are you going to lead a life of default? And in many cases, I think Kahneman, his system one, system two brain analogy is very powerful in that at 20 years old, say, we have a lot of ingrained attitudes, acculturation, things like that. And we have very little exercise in factual operation of our brain. So we're transitioning from one to the other. Probably that's one of the real good arguments for getting professional or college training post high school, is to get you into that. Because only once you do that can you look back on yourself and say, okay, who am I? And what do I care about really, independent of these other influences that I've had through my life to date. So that gets you started in the process. And again, we're not trying to shame anybody at that point. Everybody arrives at this point at a different time and in a different fashion.
Yeah.
But something has to motivate that. Maybe an inspiration, maybe a motivation, maybe you have a religious inclination or a philosophical inclination that makes you decide what I'm doing right now is not enough or it's not right. That's the trigger point that says, okay, so who can help me? Well, a school guidance counselor isn't quite up to that job, and that's not their charter. There's not really a lot of college training in terms of career counseling either. And there's not a blended mix of the things that we're trying to offer anywhere that I have been able to find. It tends to be more, I've got this point solution over here, or, if we need, neurolinguistic programming assistance, we can get that. But how do you tie that into the whole? How do these bits and pieces fit together, not only strategically, but tactically? And what is my responsibility to myself and the process to achieve the goals that I want to achieve?
Wow, it's really great. I love your focus, your kind of solution-oriented focus of helping people not get stopped by some limitation of not knowing what's next or not knowing how to overcome this next barrier, but that there's help out there. And it sounds like you've put together a really extraordinary compilation of the point solutions, as you call it, the help that's out there to help people overcome any area. It sounds really exciting of what you've put together, and I'm super proud to have people know about it through my podcast. You're really helping people reach that level of fulfillment in a very different way than perhaps myself, who's more of a consciousness teacher and life design strategist. But I love the tactical approach. It's really lovely.
Well, for some, not everybody's cut from the same mold.
Yeah, of course. You're going to reach people that would think I'm too hairy-fairy, and I'm going to reach people that would think you're too analytical. So
yes, exactly.
We both have the same commitment. That's what I'm so excited about in having this conversation with you is, you and I might come from very, very different kind of schools of thought about how people reach fulfillment, but we both have that commitment to people living fully expressed, fully engaged lives. And, you're going to reach people that I never would, and vice versa. So I really love what you're bringing to people.
Right. And, as an aside, I like to be able to say to folks, well, why should I be listening to you? And the point is, I lived this process and have for 50 years. And it's not my authority that created the book. It's people who have published books for the last, 30, 40 years who are experts in their field. I'm not introducing anything new, but I'm giving vision to the fact that, hey, there's stuff out there for every one of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jim, I know you actually offer the book as a free download, which I just so appreciate about you. So tell people where they can find the book that you have written, the Lifelong Fulfillment book.
Sure. Well, everything we do.com.
Okay.
And you put Jim at in front of that if you want to reach me.
Okay, so Jim at lifefulfillment.com to reach you personally, and then the website lifefulfillment.com, and you can download the book there.
Right, and the book is there, and it's also on Amazon. And it's not free, but if rather than have anybody who doesn't have the means to have the book, send me an email. I will give it to you for free.
That's
Okay?
awesome. So great. I love it. Well, Jim, thank you for being a guest with us on the Conscious Living Podcast and bringing your very unique and well thought out perspective of how to help people live lifelong fulfillment. It's been lovely to have you.
Me too. It's been great.